The story starts with our protagonist, whose username was Outboxer009, logging into a video game and checking the in-game chat. In fact, he quickly got annoyed after noticing that someone was calling him No Life. However, he quickly forgot that and began to wonder out loud what he should do that day, while moving his mouse to set the cursor in the proper place in order to write in the in-game chat. Nevertheless, at that moment, a player, whose username was Yellowstorm, teased him in the chat by asking him if he was ready to drop down to second place that month. However, instead of getting angry, that taunt made him smirk, and he quickly wondered if he should go check out that month's rankings first. After all, he was Jude Bayer, aka Outboxer009, a player who had held the top ranking for 22 consecutive months. Despite having launched over 10 years before, Legend of Heroes 2 was such a well-made game that there were still players remaining. It had a system that let the user select a playable character within the game's world and tailored it to the user's preference. Furthermore, based on the achievements that you accomplished in the game, a ranking occurs each month, and it just so happened that it was that day, so our protagonist entered a special room called Hall of Fame to check the rankings. There, he met with a player whose username was ruthless and whose rank was 95. Right after, the female avatar enthusiastically greeted him before wondering out loud if there was going to be an upset that month. Almost immediately, another player said that she was going to be ranked 1 that time. That player was Cordelia Chase, aka Yellowstorm, who had held the second place for 21 consecutive months. Nevertheless, Jude remained cool and simply told Cordelia that her wings were clipping into the wall. He then thought that it was still shocking that those girls dressed up their avatars so cutely. Even though he decided to return the punch, and while showing the greatest genius pose in history, he called Cordelia the eternal rank 2, before adding that her eyes were bigger than her stomach. Almost immediately, a very pissed Cordelia went to face Jude and told him that it would be different that time, to which our protagonist replied by laughing before telling her that he would permit her to dream as much as she wished. Right after, before manhwarecap could say anything to appease the two, the announcer said that the results for that month were arriving. Rank 1 was Outboxer009, who kept the top ranking 1 more month, and rank 2 was Yellowstorm, who kept the second place for another month. Shortly after, Cordelia was the first one to react, and she began cursing before asking what the heck was happening. Of course, Jude didn't miss the chance to mock her, and he quickly told her that it showed the gap between him and her. Immediately thereafter, Cordelia cursed even more, and other players began to enjoy the show. Some said that her reaction was to be expected, while others told her that Jude made fun of her because she ended up reacting that way. As for our protagonist, he kept teasing her by saying that it had been fun before, adding that she should try to work harder the following month. Then, without waiting for her response, he said that he had to go. Right after, manhwarecap tried to calm Cordelia down by telling her that the difference had been only 800 points. But our protagonist truly wanted to see the world burn, and quickly added that he didn't know how Cordelia hadn't been able to raise those 800 points. That taunt proved to be very effective because Cordelia was warned by the system that reminded her that extremely severe profanity was restricted. After seeing that, other players began to laugh out loud while the girl began to complain since she couldn't believe the system had considered what she had said before as profanity. Nevertheless, the system didn't care about her opinion and warned her again, reminding her that extremely severe profanity was restricted. In fact, the system censored all the messages Cordelia was sending, and Jude kept provoking her by telling her that he hoped she dreamed about him. Meanwhile, manhwarecap told Cordelia to calm down because, at that rate, she would get chat restricted. Almost immediately, both Cordelia and Jude left the chat, and that caused other players to celebrate, manhwarecap included. In fact, other players began to imagine some steamy scenes, similar to those out of hot BL novels, between Outboxer009 and Yellowstorm, thinking that they had left at the same time to meet in real life. Not to mention that some of them began to call Yellowstorm the successor of the legendary King of Silver. Suddenly, a mysterious system triggered and declared that users Kang Jinho and Hong Yu-hee had entered Pleiades. Right after, a young man, who was profusely sweating inside what looked like a medieval room, thought that he couldn't breathe properly. Moreover, his vision was blurry, he felt dizzy, and he couldn't recognize the place. Still, he tried to rationalize what he was feeling by thinking that perhaps he had caught a cold, but everything changed when he stood in front of a mirror and realized that his reflection was a younger version of his character from Legend of Heroes 2. Of course, what shocked him the most was the fact that he was currently looking at his own reflection, which meant that he was looking at himself. However, before he could begin to understand the situation, he felt a sharp pain in his head and noticed that a lot of information was flowing into his mind. Pleiades was a fantasy world where nations waged war with other nations and where the heroes from Legend of Heroes 2 adventured. Moreover, angels and demons had descended into the world. It was then that he discovered that he had entered the game as the former frail Jude Bayer. After all, the reflection in the mirror definitely belonged to the character our protagonist had used as Outboxer009. Jude Bayer was the second son of the Bayer house, a house renowned for their swordsmanship. At that moment, someone knocked on the door while asking if it would be fine to enter the room. That made him realize that he was a young master. Right after, his personal maid, a young lady called Maya, apologized for being rude since she had entered the room without waiting for his response. She then explained that she had done it because she had assumed that he had left since there was no response. As for our protagonist, he squeezed his brain to remember who she was and what her name was. Moreover, he also recalled that she was a blunt maid. Afterwards, he told her that it was fine while thinking that, since he didn't know what was going on, he should try to calm down. The maid then said that she had gone there to find him because the lady with whom he had had an engagement ceremony had arrived for a visit. Meanwhile, at Bear House drawing room, Cordelia was complaining because Jude had not arrived and she was getting stiff. Back with our protagonist, he was walking through a corridor while thinking that Jude's fiancée was Cordelia Chase from the Chase House, which was renowned for their magic. In fact, he had to admit that his heart was pounding because the real Cordelia was his fiancée, considering that Yellowstorm used to play with Cordelia in the game. Still, he knew that there were more important things at hand, so he decided to ignore his fluttering heart and focus on the fact that it was important to meet people to understand the current situation. Shortly after, he finally met with her and almost blurted out that his name was Outboxer009. Luckily, he managed to stop himself in time and introduced himself as the second son of the Bear House, Jude Bayer. However, for some reason, they managed to recognize each other and immediately asked why the other had arrived there. Yes, Yellowstorm had also appeared in Pleiades inside the body of the character she used in the game Legend of Heroes 2, Cordelia Chase. Our protagonist then tried to calm down and rationalize the situation. He was aware that Cordelia would be there because she was engaged to Jude Bayer, but he was sure he had seen something related to Yellowstorm. In fact, he still didn't understand why Yellowstorm had appeared in his mind. At that moment, Maja pulled him out of his reverie, and he, after apologizing for spacing out, quickly invited Cordelia to sit down. What followed was an awkward silence between them, but that didn't stop him from trying to test her. Right after, he called her using a nickname from the modern world, and she immediately reacted to it. In fact, her reaction was so obvious that he was convinced that she was truly Yellowstorm. However, since there were other people with them, he couldn't ask all the things he wanted. After all, not only was Maya with them, but a female warrior was guarding Cordelia, so he decided that they needed to find a place to talk privately. Almost immediately, he began to speak in code to ask her to meet with him at a certain place at a certain time. Of course, she quickly understood that he was using a code based on Legend of Heroes 2, and after decoding the message, she realized that he was telling her to meet at midnight in his house's garden since they had a lot to talk about. As for our protagonist, he knew that if he was really talking with Yellowstorm, she should have gotten the message. Shortly after, she also spoke in code to let him know that she had understood, and then she stood up while telling Dahlia, her guard, that it was time for them to leave, which surprised the female warrior. While they were leaving, our protagonist quickly said that he would await the day they met again, which could be understood as Jude talking to his fiancée or as Outboxer009 talking to Yellowstorm. Once Cordelia and Dahlia left, Maja asked our protagonist what had happened, to which he replied that everything was fine, while thinking that even the way she talked said that she was Yellowstorm. That night, he was walking in the garden while thinking that he was really in the north because it was very chilly despite being summer. He then wondered if Yellowstorm had managed to get there properly, and almost immediately he spotted her. Right after, he called her by her in-game username, and she did the same, using his in-game username. They both then got closer while smiling, and he asked her permission to say something he had been thinking about since that time. After hearing that, she playfully cursed before saying that it felt great that she believed she knew what that something might be. Immediately thereafter, they recreated a famous Korean meme, trying to break the ice. Our protagonist then said that they should stop messing around and get to business before asking her when she had woken up, to which she replied that it had been 2 days before. Apparently, at that moment, she opened her eyes and she was suddenly in Pleiades. Right after, she asked him when he had woken up. Jude quickly replied that he believed it had also been 2 days before, and she immediately asked why he was unsure. He then told her that it couldn't be helped before asking her if she knew about Jude Bayer's constitution. The young master suffered from 9 blocked yin pathways, an illness that arose from an abnormal level of yin qi. The illness caused a problem with the blood vessels, which limited one's qi circulation. Due to that, the body became extremely weak, and it became impossible for the person affected to use mana. On top of that, it was exceedingly difficult to get the remedy. At that moment, our protagonist thought that what had happened to him had been a little unfair, before wondering why he had to possess the body of Jude Bayer, even though Jude had the talent to overcome the illness. Right after, he said that it would have been so much better if he had become a cheat character like Leon or Maximilian. However, he quickly dismissed that and told Cordelia that he had been really sick 2 days before, saying some weird things while unconscious. Cordelia then asked him what odd things he said, and our protagonist replied that, from what he had heard from Maya, he had asked where he was. At that moment, she understood why he was unsure of his memory of the last 2 days, and then she also realized something and asked him if he was not fine at that moment. She then added that he had gone there to meet with him, which was not an easy thing to do. Right after, she asked him why they had to secretly go there and if he knew how hard it was for a grown lady to escape without their parents knowing. After hearing that, he defended himself by asking her how he could jump a fence while suffering the 9-blocked yin pathways disease, before asking since when she was a lady. The last question confused Cordelia, but she quickly replied that she had been a lady since she was born. That shocked him, because he couldn't believe that Yellowstorm was a girl. Right after, she asked him if Outboxer 09 was a boy, which he immediately confirmed. See? It is at this moment, and not before, that Jude learns that Yellowstorm is a woman. Cordelia then told him that she hadn't said anything since it felt unnecessary, to which he reluctantly agreed, while thinking that he also believed she was a boy due to her style of using military terms while speaking. Afterward, he asked her not to be too mad, because there was another reason why he had told her to go to his house. She quickly asked what that reason was, and he explained that his father, Count Bayer, had taken his brother and vassals on an expedition. That meant that the mansion was quite empty at that moment, slimming their chances of getting caught. Moreover, he remembered sending them off, so he was certain. Nevertheless, after saying that, he somehow felt that something was not right with him. Cordelia noticed his reaction and asked him if he was like that too, which confused him. She then explained that he had become the character from the game he had played for so long. She then added that, at first, she had felt that they were inside the game, but as time went by, she felt like her previous life was Yellowstorm. It was such a strong feeling that her previous memories and Cordelia's didn't feel like they were clashing at all. In fact, calling Count Chase father even felt natural, not to mention that our protagonist had called Count Bayer his father naturally and matter-of-factly. After hearing that, he had to admit that she was right, which meant that they hadn't gone into the game, but the world of Pleiades had become their reality. He then told her that their situation was dangerous, because if that was really reality, that meant that there was no way for them to return, to which she replied that the worst part was that Pleiades was destined to be destroyed by the Great Summoning Ritual. At that moment, Jude laughed and said that the pick was not too bad if you think of it like that, before thinking of the characters he had mentioned before. Right after, Cordelia got angry and asked him what he was talking about and how he was able to laugh at that moment. He then explained that Jude and Cordelia were off-meta characters. Moreover, coincidentally, he was a warrior and she was a magician. Almost immediately, she got what he meant and realized that they would have no problem splitting items. In fact, after thinking of it as a game, a sudden burst of motivation washed over the couple of no-lifers. Ladies and gentlemen, that's how one of the greatest manhwa couples ever, from stories set in video game worlds, came to be. She then found it amusing to be doing a party play at that moment, considering that she hadn't done so a single time in 5 years. As for Jude, he agreed with her, not to mention that waking up in a game world was absurd enough. However, our protagonist didn't miss the chance to tease her and suddenly lamented having to party up with the person who was always second place, which obviously pissed Cordelia a lot. However, before she could explode, he quickly asked her to cooperate with him, considering how things were at that moment. If I were asked to define Cordelia in a few words, I would say that she is short-tempered, and since Jude is a freaking troll, all the ingredients are set to have the classic bickering couple. Still, even when trying to appease her, he just couldn't help himself, and whispered that he would just think of it as a part of life, and since she managed to catch something he had said, she got angrier. Luckily, he managed to calm her down by explaining that if that was truly reality, they should be able to fix his 9-blocked yin pathways much faster than in the game. After all, as long as they obtained an item full of harsh yang energy, they should be able to clear that disease in one go. He then reminded her that she shouldn't be trying to do everything by herself since they were doing a party play. Right after, he added that once he got better, he would be of great help to her, to which she reluctantly agreed. Shortly after, she told him that his plan relied on them finding an item filled with yang energy, before adding that there was no such item in the vicinity. However, he corrected her by saying that there was one at the Belkeen Mountains. After hearing that, she tried to remember what that item was, and shortly after, she yelled at him, asking if he was talking about the Necklace of the Sun. She yelled so loud that he had to remind her that they were meeting in secret. She then calmed down, but still asked him if he was insane. After all, the Necklace of the Sun was an item dropped by Lacegang, a mid-game boss, so there was no way for low levels like them to kill him. However, he replied that he was aware of it, before adding that he had been brainstorming and had found a solution, which surprised her. Right after, he suggested to her that they should go on a date, which astonished her. Nevertheless, he insisted on it and said that they should ride the carriage and go on a date. Sometime later, they were indeed inside a carriage on a date, and shortly after, they stepped out of it and began to enjoy the scenery, while Cordelia said that the weather was quite good. To which Jude replied that seeing the beautiful flowers, it was quite worth riding the carriage out there. He even took the chance to flirt with his fiancée by saying that the beauty of the flowers paled in comparison to Cordelia's, which even made Dahlia and Maja blush. As for Cordelia, she was pissed by Jude's actions and told him that she disliked it when he teased her. However, he completely dismissed her words and suggested to her that they should go to a certain spot nearby, since the view there looked great. They kept walking for a short while, and then Cordelia suddenly cursed before saying that she really couldn't do what they were doing. Right after, Jude told her that even though he didn't care if she cursed, she had to make sure that others couldn't hear her. Besides, he warned her against walking very fast because Dahlia and Maja might notice that they were trying to get further away. After hearing that, Cordelia showed her displeasure by telling Jude that he was already nagging. Then, she asked him to spill the details regarding his plan, since she wanted to know how a couple of level 1 players could capture Lizigang and receive the Necklace of the Sun. The Necklace of the Sun was an item that could suppress the powers of evil. Besides, it was dropped by Lizigang of the Red Moon. Lizigang was a powerful monster that appeared in the latter half of Legend of Heroes 2. A monster that was sealed in the Sun God's Temple, located in the middle of the Belkeen Mountains. Back with our protagonist, he told Cordelia that he had never said anything about capturing Lizigang, which confused her. Nevertheless, he refused to explain his plan and simply told her that she shouldn't sweat over the details because he had his ways. Right after, he asked if he had the stuff he had asked for, to which she replied that he did, before complaining about it because it had been tough to hide it under her dress. After hearing that, he praised her and told her that he would trust her since she had taken it with her. However, she didn't like that he had called her his Yellow Storm and demanded that he stop saying disgusting things before asking him how they were going to do what they were about to do. Okay, do I need to say that Cordelia is acting like a tsundere here? Jude then replied that it was simple before signaling a nearby cliff. He then added that he had checked it out on his way there, and the area matched the area in the game. So once they got to that area, she would carry him and jump off. After hearing that, she told him that the Sun God's Temple showed up if you just wrapped around that flower bed and went down, so she didn't understand why they had to jump off the cliff. He then asked her if she had ever gone through the West Path in the game, before explaining that it was a shortcut. Cordelia then blushed and immediately said that she knew that, before adding that she was just testing him. Sure, right. Of course, you knew it, Cordelia. Obviously, Jude knew that she was lying because her facial expression was screaming that she didn't know that information. In fact, he concluded that she really couldn't lie. Right after, he told her that she could take the long way, like she had suggested, but they couldn't drag Dahlia and Maja along with them. So, by following his strategy, the two female attendants, who couldn't use magic, would have a difficult time following them. Of course, since he was aware that what they were about to do was dangerous, he thought they should leave some insurance. She didn't get what he meant by that, and he offered to explain the whole plan to her under the condition that she listened to the entire thing without cursing. She got suspicious, but in the end, agreed, so he began to explain his entire strategy, which was based on the fact that they were engaged, and shortly after, she began to yell. Well, at least she didn't curse, so I guess it's a win? She blushed hard and yelled at him, asking him if he was crazy, before adding that she wasn't willing to follow his plan. Right after, he asked her if she had another plan that could work, before adding that he believed that Maja and Dahlia were beginning to notice something was up. Cordelia then began to tremble while trying to calm down, and eventually ended up cursing out loud before saying that she would do what he had suggested. Almost immediately, he grabbed her hand, and then both of them jumped off the cliff, which of course scared the hell out of Dahlia and Maja. While in midair, Cordelia cast a spell to fly, which allowed them to land smoothly at the bottom. Right after, Dahlia, who had arrived at the edge of the cliff, asked Cordelia what she was doing before asking her to go back up quickly, since it was dangerous to be down there. Cordelia then began to hesitate while trying to say something, and Jude kept reminding her that she had to follow the plan. She then blushed hard again, but managed to muster her courage to yell that she wanted to spend some time alone with our protagonist. She then added that he wouldn't do anything inappropriate because he was a gentleman after all. As for Jude, while hearing her words being said out loud, he got embarrassed and thought that perhaps the insurance he had chosen had been a little too expensive. Back with Cordelia, she told Dahlia that they would be back before dinner, so they shouldn't have to worry. Dahlia then asked her when she had gotten so close to Jude, before saying that, in any case, she shouldn't distance herself so far away from her escorts since it was dangerous. At that moment, Maja placed her hand over the shoulder of Dahlia and said, while blushing, that she could also vouch for Jude's gentlemanlike demeanor. Right after, Dahlia blushed too, before saying that Jude's behavior was not the problem at hand. In the meantime, Jude took Cordelia's hand and ran away with her, since he knew that it was their chance. Dahlia quickly noticed that and yelled at them, but they simply didn't listen and ended up escaping as planned. Sometime later, Cordelia was scolding herself for what she had done before. She then complained to Jude, since she not only had to carry him off the cliff, but she also had to make the excuse for it. In the end, she asked him why he was shoving all the embarrassing stuff onto her. After hearing that, he simply asked her to stop being difficult. After all, he had the 9-blocked yin pathways disease, so he couldn't carry her with his thin, frail arms. Obviously, he was being dramatic there. And she noticed, so she only said that she would make him pay once he was cured. At that moment, he told her that she was not the only one who had done something embarrassing because he had done one thing, too. After all, he had sent that letter requesting the date or quest for the carriage ride to the flower fields. He then explained that Maja, whose hobby was reading romance novels, was right next to him and watched him write the entire thing. She even had suggested that he change the opening line to Miss Cordelia, whom I dearly long for. Hearing that embarrassed both of them, but he quickly recovered and told her that, in the end, it hadn't been too bad, considering what she had had to shout in front of Dahlia and Maja. Obviously, Cordelia got angry after hearing that and asked him if he wanted to die, but he simply ignored her before saying that it was time to move on and that he would lead. 10 minutes later, Jude's HP was almost empty, and he ended up falling to the ground while gasping a lot. After noticing that, Cordelia asked him if he was fine, while thinking that he had told her that he was going to take the lead. At that moment, he cursed for the first time while saying that he was not fine due to his disease. She then thought that he was really in a frail condition, but her thoughts were interrupted by him, who asked her if she could carry him, which surprised her. He then added that he should carry him since they needed to get there on time. After hearing that, she replied that she understood before letting him know that he didn't need to talk anymore. Nevertheless, he asked her to stop saying things like that because she was raising his death flags. Sometime later, they entered a cave, and Cordelia, while carrying Jude on her back, said that after getting there, she had to admit that it really looked exactly like what they had seen in the game. Right after, she complained because she felt beaten and asked him if they were going in the right direction. Sadly, he didn't reply, and she said that she felt like she was carrying a corpse, but luckily, after a while, he finally saw the temple of the Sun God. She then added that, in the game, Lacegang was sealed there after fighting the Sun Paladins. Shortly after, Cordelia said that she could immediately tell that they were really there and added that she finally knew what it felt like. Right after, he asked her if she was sensing something, to which she replied by asking him if he knew the dialogue in the game that popped up every time he entered the temple of the Sun God. After hearing the question, he asked her if she was referring to the one that was like, you could feel the divine power of the Sun God, and she confirmed it. She then added that before it was just text in the game, but there, at that moment, she could experience the feeling herself. In fact, while smiling, she said that she felt like her heart was being cleansed. Jude then began to get captivated by her beautiful expression, but he quickly noticed it and began to wonder why he was feeling that way. Right after, an elated Cordelia said that, so far, it looked like it was exactly the same as the game, before adding that there were no monsters around that area because of the divine power around the temple. She then began to search for the place where Lysagang had been sealed, and shortly after, she signaled a certain path. As for Jude, he was still trying to calm himself down while thinking that Cordelia was supposed to have a beautiful appearance, which was probably what had made his heart flutter. In short, he refused to admit that Yellowstorm had made him feel that way. Okay, so he is also a tsundere? Right after, his thoughts were interrupted by her because she had found the place where Lysagang was sealed. They then got closer, and Cordelia couldn't help but feel amazed at the sight of the huge room that had been built to contain Lysagang. It was then that she realized that they were going to face off against a demon who had required a huge amount of effort to seal, so she wanted to double-check if Jude really had a way to beat it. After hearing that, he smiled at her and replied that he had it before asking her to hand over the stuff she had prepared. She agreed, but quickly warned him against taking peeks since she had hidden them under her skirt. Shortly after, once he saw all the stuff she had hidden under her skirt, he teased her by asking her if she was Cordeliamon, a Pokemon. She then got pissed and replied that it had taken a lot of effort, which meant that he should be grateful. In fact, she warned him against behaving like the sort of filth who didn't know the meaning of the word gratitude. He then admitted that if it were just him, he would have hit a roadblock right from trying to make a certain potion he was holding in his hands. He also added that it sure was a good thing that the Chase household was known for its proficiency in magic. Wow, he even sincerely thanked her. Obviously, Cordelia enjoyed being praised, and he kept caressing her ego for a while, before taking a paintbrush while saying that it was time for him to show off his skills. Jude then began to draw a magic circle, and Cordelia quickly recognized it as Velastin's magic circle. The Velastin's magic circle was the greatest work of Barrier Master, Velastin, who would make a name for themselves in the second half of Legend of Heroes. It had the risk of not being able to bind a demon it had bound before, and having a 3-minute time limit, it was also called Cup Ramon's magic circle. But as its strength scaled with the demon's strength, it was a powerful, demon confinement magic circle. That astonished Cordelia to the point of thinking that it was something insane since he had been able to completely memorize a very complicated thing. At that moment, her thoughts were interrupted by him since he had finished and had told her that it was her turn. That caught her by surprise, but he continued and asked her if she knew what he had done since he was too tired to explain it. That question bothered Cordelia, who quickly replied that she knew what it was, and he then asked her if she knew how to draw it. She didn't, but she immediately replied that she did, just so he didn't think he was superior to her, but he easily saw through her blatant lie. However, he chose to pretend she had fooled him and explained to her that because of his illness, he couldn't activate the magic circle. Thus, she needed to do the activation of Velastin's magic circle. Of course, since Cordelia was only level 1, she wouldn't have the magic power to hold on to Lysagang for 3 minutes. So for the power, they would use the magic that was flowing through the seal of the sun god Solari. That meant they would use the power of the temple that had sealed Lysagang away and call upon the sealed one's real body for just a moment. Cordelia understood the explanation and asked him if 1 drop of blood should be enough, to which he replied that it should be enough to activate it, before warning her against wounding herself too much. After hearing that, and while holding the edge of a knife against one of her fingers, Cordelia told him that it was weird to see his concern. Right after, she offered 1 drop of blood and activated the magic circle. Shortly after, Jude said that the activation had been a success since the circle was shining, but he then noticed that something was wrong because the place was shaking a lot. He then asked Cordelia if she was okay, to which she replied that she could feel the sharp increase in mana density, before adding that the seal of Solari was going to break. Afterward, before them appeared a huge figure that was chained by several chains. Once he saw it, Jude thought that Velastin's magic circle had activated properly, considering that Lysagang was chained up. That should be considered a success. However, he felt like she was going to get crushed under the pressure, which was to be expected of a late-game boss. At that moment, he wondered if Cordelia was alright, but when she turned around to look at her, he noticed that she was in fangirl mode with her eyes literally shining. He then called her, and she simply replied that it was there. Jude didn't understand the meaning of her words, and she quickly explained that on Lysagang's hips was the necklace of the sun, which shocked the young man since he couldn't understand her behavior. The elated Cordelia then told him that she would lend him her staff so he could use it to grab the item. Right after, he thought that she was only thinking about getting the loot, which was immediately confirmed since she hurried him to get the necklace while the demon was still sleeping. At that moment, Jude finally complied, since using her staff would be better than grabbing it by hand. Unfortunately, when he was about to get the item, Lysagang suddenly woke up. After realizing that they had been caught red-handed, they decided to run away. Nevertheless, that didn't appease the demon. In fact, it was the opposite, and Lysagang got furious. As a matter of fact, when the demon released its power, Jude was astonished because he couldn't believe the monster could release such power while being sealed. Besides, he began to curse because he couldn't put strength into his legs and couldn't get up after having fallen to the ground. Nevertheless, his thoughts were interrupted by Cordelia, who yelled at the monster, telling him to stop messing around since he was still chained up and couldn't even move. Okay, Cordelia is really playing with fire right now, but I have to say that I just love her guts. Immediately thereafter, she cast a magic missile and threw it at Lysagang, which totally shocked Jude to the point of asking her if she was insane and why she had provoked the demon. However, before any of them could say anything else, a light surrounded her, and he quickly noticed that she had just leveled up, which left him flabbergasted. Originally, Lysagang was a powerful demon that you would face in the second half of the game. In fact, if it were like the original, it was a powerful boss mob that they wouldn't even be able to attack. However, thanks to the shortcut they had taken by using Velastin's magic circle, it had become possible to attack the demon. Furthermore, just dealing 1 point of damage was giving Cordelia enough combat experience to level up, since the level difference was high as well. Right after, both of them began to calculate the experience gain using their gamer brains, and shortly after, a mocking smile appeared on their faces. Obviously, Lysagang was not happy with the intruder's attitude and kept attacking them with laser beams from his eyes. On the other hand, Cordelia kept firing magic missiles at the demon like there was no tomorrow, which astonished Jude. However, that strategy soon proved to be effective because she leveled up again, and she told him that she was going to dash after grabbing the item, but the change in their circumstances had ended up being positive for her. As for Jude, he didn't fail to notice Cordelia's insane accuracy. After all, she was hitting all the parts besides the steel chains holding the demon down. On the other hand, Lysagang was really mad at that point because a couple of ants dared to be disrespectful in front of him. It was then that Jude decided to step forward because he also wanted to level up. Because of the 9 blocked yin pathways, he couldn't use magic like Cordelia, and because of the blocked key circuits, he couldn't use martial arts, so he decided to fight by being overgeared. He then used the necklace, and after reciting a chant about him being the one with the blessing of the great sun god, Solari, he attacked the demon while using the necklace like a knife and managed to deal the huge amount of 1 point of damage. Moreover, he immediately leveled up after doing it. Then, while Lysagang got even more furious by the ant's behavior in front of him, Cordelia was impressed after noticing that Jude had memorized the prayer of the sun god. He then explained to her that Velastin's magic circle could only be used once, so that was their first and only chance to beat up the sealed Lysagang. After hearing that, Cordelia recalled that people called it the Cup of Raman's magic circle. Right after, Jude told her that there was 1 minute remaining, and they then began to attack the demon with all their might. Sometime later, the demon told them that he had memorized their faces and had engraved their souls into his mind, before adding that on the day he was freed, he would make them feel immeasurable pain. However, those words didn't intimidate the pair, and both Cordelia and Jude kept attacking the demon, who suddenly decided to change his approach and beg, but that was also futile. In fact, when the humiliated demon was forced to leave, he told them that he would definitely be seeing them again because he would find them. Sadly, for Lysagang, Jude and Cordelia didn't mind those warnings and kept mocking him by telling the demon to meet again in Act 7 and that it had been fun meeting him. Once the demon disappeared, Cordelia sighed in relief and said that she had to admit that, even though she already knew it, Jude was truly insane. Almost immediately, Jude replied that she was not of the right mind either, not to mention that she had attacked first. Cordelia then asked Jude if his 9-blocked yin pathways disease was getting better, to which he replied that he would have to slowly melt the extreme energies that were blocking all of his pathways with the power of the sun, which meant that it would take some time to be cured. The girl understood the explanation and told him that they should go back since they had already obtained the item they were looking for, not to mention that they had leveled up a lot, too. He immediately agreed and hugged her, which annoyed Cordelia to the point of asking him if he wanted to get hit. However, he asked her to support him a bit because his legs were shaking and it was hard for him to walk. After hearing that, Cordelia reluctantly agreed to help him and let him take advantage of her. After all, what he suggested was better than asking for a piggyback ride. On that night, when Jude and Cordelia got back home, they received a sentence of 10 days of house arrest. Sometime later, Jude threw himself on the bed while feeling exhausted. In fact, his body was so stiff that he felt like he was dying. He couldn't believe that running 10 laps around the training grounds could be so tiring. Of course, he was aware that it was all due to his disease, but that didn't make him feel better. However, he also noticed that his body was definitely improving due to the Necklace of the Sun. He then thought that if that world was truly reality, their ultimate goal was to survive the ending of Legend of Heroes 2 and the grand advent of Demons and Angels, Armageddon. After all, they knew that Pleiades was destined to be destroyed by the Great Summoning Ritual, so they had to stop that ritual from happening somehow. To achieve that grand goal, a weakling who could barely run 10 laps around the training grounds and a 1-star magician are sorely lacking. That was why, no matter how much of a hurry they were in, at that moment it was time to hone the basics. Luckily, he was not fighting alone. Moreover, since it had been a week since retrieving the Necklace of the Sun, his house arrest, along with Cordelia's, ended in 3 days. So, he needed to slowly get ready for what was next, which he was sure would make Maya happy. On the other hand, Cordelia suddenly felt shivers and began to wonder what was happening, since she had gotten a bad feeling. She then recalled that the Legend of Heroes 2's first major event, the social gathering, was still far off. So she immediately believed that Jude was scheming something. After all, in her eyes, Outboxer 009 was a mischievous, annoying punk who always bullied her. At that moment, her thoughts were interrupted by Dahlia, who knocked on the door and then entered her room to inform her that she had received a love letter from young Master Jude. Of course, Cordelia didn't feel touched at all by it. On the contrary, she felt annoyed since she believed that he didn't take responsibility for his words. Still, didn't fail to notice how excited Dahlia was and asked her why she was like that, to which Dahlia replied that the letter was great news. Dahlia then explained that Cordelia had lost her appetite over the past few days because of her worry over young Master Jude, so she was sure that the letter would lessen her worries. The problem was that Dahlia had completely misunderstood Cordelia's behavior to the point of thinking she had lost her appetite, when in reality, Cordelia had eaten so much that she had gained 1 kilogram. Afterward, Dahlia apologized for getting upset last time during the picnic. The guard then explained that when she saw Cordelia holding young Master Jude and jumping off at the Belkine Mountains, she had thought that it was a very dangerous thing to do. Furthermore, Dahlia was there to protect her, but all she could do was worry. Nevertheless, she had understood later on that the young miss had found someone with whom she could truly be. In fact, Dahlia confessed that Maja had taught her something big that day. The book the maid showed her happened to have the same heartwarming scene. Obviously, Cordelia didn't like that at all and even began to wonder what the heck Maya had told Dahlia. Right after, Dahlia said that young Master Jude had also sent a love letter on the day of the date, and the guard wondered how hot the words he wrote that time were. Okay, I think we might have a little pervert here. Immediately thereafter, Dahlia gave the letter to Cordelia and urged her to read it. Cordelia then thought that she should read it quickly and get rid of it. Once she started reading, she noticed that the beginning of it was already extremely cheesy, which made her feel more annoyed. However, in Dahlia's eyes, Cordelia's reaction indicated that she was loving the letter very much. This is why being inexperienced in love matters is a huge problem. Back with Cordelia, she couldn't believe Jude had written those words for the sake of it, and began trying to find some hidden joke that could only be read by reading the first letter of each line or something like that. However, when she continued reading its content, she found out something shocking. The final sentence of the letter was written in Korean, and according to those words, he had invited her 2 days later at 2 p.m. in the confessional of the Temple of Varuna. After reading that part, Cordelia was truly impressed and thought that he had used his brain quite a bit. She then recalled the information she knew about the Temple of Varuna. Varuna was the god of the hidden veil and the guardian and protector who presided over secrets. Thus, in the temples of Varuna built all over the continent, not just the kingdom, existed a place to not only share one's personal little secrets, but also a place where you could share state secrets. In short, it was an absolutely flawless confessional. Cordelia then tried to guess why he had chosen that place for their meeting. She began to wonder if there was something in there, since she was sure he was not trying to confess his sins of making fun of her up to that moment, and trying to ask for forgiveness. Besides, she was also aware that if it was Outboxer09, he wouldn't ask to meet up for nothing. Right after, she told Dahlia that she wanted to meet with young Master Jude at the Temple of Varuna in 2 days from that moment. That made Dahlia feel elated since the young miss was requesting a date the day they were no longer forbidden from going out, which confirmed that young Master Jude also really wanted to see Cordelia. Obviously, that annoyed Cordelia a lot because she knew that what Outboxer09 wanted to see was the level-up effect. Still, Cordelia decided to ignore Dahlia's remarks and told her that she would go to the Temple of Varuna in 2 days, to which the guard replied that there was a certain mood to a tryst at the Temple of the God of Secrets. Right after, a blushing Dahlia reassured Cordelia by telling her that, for that date, she would properly make time for just the two of them. At that point, Cordelia decided to go with the flow because it was simply too tiring to even retort. 2 days later, at the Temple of Varuna, Dahlia told Cordelia to enjoy her trip before adding that she would be standing by around there for them to have some crazy time together. After hearing that, Cordelia thanked her guard while trying to look happy about it. Afterward, while Cordelia was entering the temple, Dahlia told her to enjoy her date before adding that she would return to escort her after 30 minutes. After hearing that, an annoyed Cordelia thought that the whole thing was not a date, but a two-person quest. She even thought that twice because it was a very important thing to make things clear in her mind. Shortly after, she met with Jude and, after the greetings, she asked him how he had borrowed the temple's confessional. She even ventured to guess that he had gotten hold of their weakness or something similar. Almost immediately, he told her that people would misunderstand if they heard what she had just said about getting hold of someone's weakness. He then explained that it had been money. After all, he was the son of an earl. Cordelia then replied that if Jude's family heard their 17-year-old young master saying something like that, they would be really shocked. However, Jude just said that they still hadn't returned from the expedition, so they didn't have to worry about it. The young woman then asked him why he had called her there, since there was nothing there, to which he replied by asking her if she thought that he would write that letter and call her there for no reason. Nevertheless, before she could reply, he explained that he had called her over there because there was a hidden event, which confused her. As a matter of fact, Cordelia asked him what he was saying, since there was nothing written about the Temple of Varuna in the Strategy Guide category on the Legend of Heroes forum. He then replied that, indeed, there was nothing written on it since he was the only one who knew it. After all, he couldn't upload every hidden event's information when he struggled so much to find them. That shocked Cordelia, and she immediately asked him, while pointing her finger at him, if he didn't upload strategies to the forum. Her attitude bothered Jude a little, but he still replied that he only uploaded those that others knew, before asking her if she uploaded everything. That truly stunned her for some seconds, and right after, she yelled that she knew it was strange. At that moment, Cordelia had an epiphany and finally understood why she couldn't catch up, no matter how hard she hunted. After hearing that confession, Jude felt embarrassed and told her that he didn't expect her to be naively showing off everything. Shortly after, she decided to change the subject and asked him what was hidden in the temple, before asking him if he had called her over to help him with something that would only benefit him. After all, she didn't want to do another quest similar to the Necklace of the Sun one. Jude couldn't believe her words, since she had been very happy when she leveled up by hitting Lysagang. However, he decided to remain silent about it and told her that there was something for him and also something for her. Right after, he explained that deep in the temple's library, there was a hidden dungeon book. A dungeon book was a book that transported the person who opened it into a dungeon. There were times when the dungeon they were transported to was in a simulated space, but there were also times when the dungeon they were transported to was in a real place. Jude then told Cordelia that the reward for clearing the dungeon was a skill book that could teach a martial arts skill and a magic skill. The martial arts skill was a footwork skill, but unfortunately, Jude hadn't beaten that dungeon as a magician yet, so he didn't know which skill book she would get either. That surprised Cordelia, because that meant that she would become the first person to clear Temple of Varuna's simulated dungeon as a magician, which Jude quickly confirmed. Almost immediately, her mood improved a lot, and I mean a lot. She went from being annoyed to being excited in a matter of seconds. Immediately thereafter, she asked Jude where that dungeon book was, She even wanted to go to the temple library at once, which confirmed to Jude that she was indeed elated. Then the young man pointed to a place and told her to look there, since he had already gotten it before she even arrived. Cordelia immediately looked at the book and even praised Jude before asking him if they should go to the dungeon right away, which he confirmed. Meanwhile, outside the room, a confused Dahlia looked at a sudden flash that came from the room where Cordelia had entered. Cordelia and Jude got teleported inside the simulated dungeon, and the young lady immediately felt the side effects. Her head hurt a lot, and she began to wiggle in pain while saying that she couldn't believe she would get dizzy from teleportation magic. Jude then asked her if she was fine, which pissed her off, so she yelled at him that she was not all right, before asking him why he was all fine and dandy. In fact, she even confessed that seeing him being fine pissed her off even more. She then used a big column that was behind her as support, while Jude replied to her that he had no idea why he was feeling fine. Afterward, he asked her if he could pat her back. A while later, she wanted to confirm if the place where they had arrived was the simulated dungeon of the Temple of Varuna, and Jude confirmed it since it looked identical to the one in the game. Right after, he reminded her that since it was a simulated dungeon, when you died, you just got sent back out of the book, which was reassuring. Nevertheless, she got angry after hearing that and told him that he was second in the servers, before adding that she would clear it on her first attempt, before asking him to stop saying such disheartening things. Moreover, if you got hit, the pain was still the same, which was not reassuring at all. Still, Jude insisted on the fact that they could get real-life experience without having to worry about their lives, which truly was a total win. Nevertheless, she didn't buy it and said that he only said good things, before adding that, since he was speaking of real-life experience, it seemed that the 9-blocked yin pathways disease was getting better. Jude confirmed it, but he then added that it was only by a bit before saying that she was also with him. Those words confused her, and she asked him what he meant by them and why he mentioned her all of a sudden. Right after, Jude replied that he had meant exactly what he had said. Afterward, Jude explained that, rather than hunting, he tended to look into people, events, and items. He tended to dig into all the variables in the game and obtain achievements. In short, he was the planning type. On the other hand, Cordelia was the battle queen who achieved points through raw damage. In fact, if you only considered the number of monsters hunted, Yellowstorm doubled Outboxer 09's numbers. Jude then told her that since he had brought the dungeon book, which only he knew about, to the table, he suggested that she carry him when it came to the fighting aspect of that dungeon. After hearing that, Cordelia stopped looking that excited, but still she told him that he was fine with it since she was confident at that time because of what she had taken there. She then asked him to turn around for a moment, and then took out from her dress 3 magic stones that not only stored magic, but also allowed one to cast spells without chanting. Right after, she explained that when they were fighting against Lacegang, she could only attack him with magic missiles, but things would be different in that new quest. Cordelia also said that when he had called her over, she guessed that something was definitely going to happen, so he had hidden those magic stones in her dress. Nevertheless, since Jude didn't look very impressed after seeing the stones, she said that they were not just normal magic stones, before adding that they had been made by her father, one of the 4 great northern powers, and the founder of the famous magician household, the Chase family. At that moment, Jude finally admitted that he felt secure after knowing that, while thinking that those stones should be one of Cordelia's trump cards. That was the reaction she was wanting to see, and she immediately got cocky and said that he should indeed feel safer. Jude then thought that, seeing how she was showing off everything from the very beginning, he could confirm that she was the very same Yellowstorm from the Legend of Heroes forum. Immediately thereafter, she opened a suitcase and told her that even though those stones were amazing, since they were hers, he would give her some items as well. Right after, he took a lot of scrolls from the suitcase and gave them to Cordelia. She quickly took a look at them and realized that they were 1-star magic circles. She also noticed that almost all of them were lightning attribute. Only one was a light attribute. Those basic magic scrolls were pieces of paper that could activate magic without chanting. You only needed to tear them to cast the spell. Jude then explained that he couldn't just be doing nothing while hiding behind her, so he had made scrolls with various attributes, all usable at their level. Those words shocked Cordelia because if Jude had truly made them, that meant that he had memorized all of them. Jude then decided to tease her and asked her if she was able to draw magic circles at that level. After all, she was ranked 2nd, and her household was a famous magician's house. Almost immediately, she replied that she could, but again, Jude could easily see through her lie. In fact, he thought that she looked very flustered, which was why it was too much fun teasing her. Still, he knew it was time to get serious, and he asked her if she could inject some magic power into the scrolls. After all, in their current state, they were just scraps of paper. That request caught her off guard, but still, she didn't fail to notice a couple of things that didn't add up. First, she wanted to know why she had to use her magic power. But above that, she wanted to confirm if he was truly suggesting that she, a magician, should stand on the front line. At that moment, Jude got embarrassed and said that, unfortunately, he happened to be someone who couldn't use mana because he had the 9 blocked yin pathways. That made Cordelia get very angry, to the point of beginning to curse the disease. She then yelled at him, asking him if he had lost the necklace of the sun before he could use it during those 10 days. Right after, Jude reminded her that the disease didn't heal instantly, before asking her not to get too angry. And, to make his request more appealing, he told her that he had taken there some mana potions and some armor for her. Sadly, that made her angrier, since she immediately realized that he was planning to use her as a magic power shuttle from the start. A while later, she cursed the mana potions before adding that, in the game, she could knock them back to back like crazy, but in real life, she felt bloated. Still, she ended up injecting magic power into all the scrolls. Jude then asked her if she was sure that she didn't need to wear the armor, since she had thrown it away because it was too heavy. Right after, Cordelia explained that her current outfit was already at her weight limit, so if she added the weight of the armor, she wouldn't be able to walk. At that moment, Jude took a look at her while wondering if she was nervous. After all, that should be her first real-life experience. In the end, Lacegang was tied up, so calling it real-life experience was a stretch. Not to mention that, at that time, they were not in the right state of mind because they were too busy leveling up. He even thought that he should tease her a bit to relieve some tension. As for Cordelia, she was extremely focused on her immediate goal of getting the first clear as a magician. Eventually, they reached a certain place, and they quickly hid behind a column. Right after, he told her that when she cut left, the enemies would pop out right away, which meant that she had to be prepared. Jude then noticed that Cordelia's face was stiff, and he admitted that he was a bit worried, but he then reassured himself by saying that it would be fine since he would be supporting her from behind. Right after, he recalled that the attribute of the first goblins that appeared there was dark, so he activated a light magic circle beneath them. Immediately thereafter, Jude assumed Ash's role and chose Yellowstorm as his Pokemon to fight the goblins. Moreover, even while feeling flustered, she was fast enough to follow up on the joke. She then threw 5 magic missiles at the goblins and destroyed them easily. Shortly after, Jude told her that reinforcements would be heading over from the following block after hearing the noise. Besides, their attribute would be Earth. Cordelia thanked him for the information and began to focus on the new enemies. She knew that she shouldn't rush things, since they had to get closer. She was aware that the best timing was the moment that the enemy got into her line of sight. So a few seconds later, she cast the spell Grease, which was an area of effect, AoE for short, spell that prevented enemy movements by making the floor slippery. She then cast Bind to restrain them. After seeing her performance, Jude said that it was her specialty to link the enemies with binding magic after making them fall over. He then gave her a potion, and she took it, although she looked a bit uncomfortable. While she was drinking the potion, he told her that when she finished, they should regroup. After all, unlike that time with Lysagang, those low-level monsters needed to be exterminated for the experience to flow in. At that moment, Cordelia cursed for not having a 2x EXP potion to drink before killing them. 5 hours, and a lot of levels later, Cordelia kept cursing, but that time was not due to a missing potion, but because her legs hurt like hell. In the game, all she had to do was click a ton of times, but when it was real life, things were different and harder. In fact, she was regretting wearing heels. At that moment, Jude thought that he had heard a similar line before and wondered if he was experiencing déjà vu. Right after, he asked her if she was tired. He then explained that they might be resting along the way, but a lot of time had already passed. Moreover, since it was her first time training in real life, he was aware that it might be overwhelming. After hearing that, she thought that it was annoying since she believed he was somehow looking down on her or making fun of her. Nevertheless, she then realized that, in the first place, getting that far at their level was already a miracle. The monster levels were higher, and they had several attributes, which meant that the dungeon difficulty should be very hard. However, the hunting so far had been very easy, so there was nothing to cry about. Not to mention that Jude's knowledge of monster weaknesses and attributes, as well as the knowledge of the terrain, was perfect. Furthermore, the dungeon strategy and the magic spell support had also been well thought out. She had to admit that he had perfectly considered and prepared what would be necessary and when. In fact, she began to wonder if he also played a support character often. She even began to think that to rank first, you needed to be that good, despite believing that the process of being that good was very annoying. On the other hand, Jude was looking at her while thinking that her expression suggested that she had a lot of complaints, but if she voiced them, he would point out their flaws, which was why she seemed to be holding back. Of course, he considered her behavior at that moment very funny. In the end, he asked her if they should rest a bit before they continued, but she replied that it was fine before adding that her feet were hurting because she had walked a lot, and that she was feeling bloated because she had been drinking too many potions. Moreover, she was very angry because his level was higher than hers, since he kept getting the last hit in. After hearing that, he decided to tease her hard and said that he understood that she should be very upset after obtaining the second place again. Of course, that hit the mark because Cordelia ended up yelling at him. Still, Jude feigned ignorance and asked her if, other than what she had said, she was doing all right, and she yelled at him again to confirm it. Right after, he told her that they should go then, since the boss's room was up ahead. Immediately thereafter, they began to walk toward the boss's room while behaving like the classic bickering couple. A while later, Cordelia said that they had been in the dungeon for a while and asked him how much time had passed in reality, since she doubted that the same 5 hours had passed out there as they had in the simulated dungeon. Jude then began to compute. According to him, 20 minutes in the Temple of Varuna's dungeon book was 1 minute on the outside, so those 5 hours they had spent inside were equivalent to 20 minutes outside. Once he told her the information, he asked her why she was interested in knowing it, to which she replied, while pouting, that Dahlia had said that she would pick her up after 30 minutes, so she was not sure if they had enough time. After hearing that, and after noticing something ahead of them, Jude smiled with confidence and replied that she didn't have to worry about it, since they had arrived at the boss's room. Once Cordelia saw the door in front of her, she was amazed and said that it was practically advertising that the boss was behind that wall, which was to be expected from a game that was a decade old. Oh, come on, tons of decade-old games are awesome. In fact, Desmond and Ezio are still the best protagonists of Assassin's Creed. As for the boss, it was a Fury Wolf, which surprised the young lady since there had been an endless number of goblins inside the simulated dungeon. She believed that having a wolf as the boss didn't match. Furthermore, the Fury Wolf had a lightning attribute, which meant that a monster with a new attribute was going to appear again. At that moment, Jude began to clap his hands while praising Cordelia's knowledge. Then he added that not only did it have the lightning attribute, but it was also fast, which meant that they would both have to move continuously. He also gave her a crucial and cryptic instruction. Before he gave her the signal, she couldn't attack. Instead, she had to focus on dodging. That instruction confused Cordelia, and she even guessed that he was trying to steal the last hit again, which pissed her off. After hearing that, an aggrieved Jude turned around and asked her what kind of person she thought he was. But before she could reply, he told her that he couldn't do that against a boss monster that they might or might not be able to kill, even if they worked together. However, instead of appeasing her, that comment made her angrier, since it somehow confirmed that he was indeed stealing the last hits on those goblins on purpose. Still, she knew it was not the time to argue and calmed down before asking him if the boss they were about to face was different from a normal Fury Wolf. After all, he was sure that there was a reason why he was telling her to wait. Nevertheless, he quickly replied, while grabbing several scrolls from his suitcase, that her assumption was wrong. The thing was that there was something that he needed to prepare beforehand. Shortly after, they entered the boss's room, and in front of them was a Level 17 Fury Wolf that looked menacing. At that moment, Cordelia mocked Jude by telling him that the monster was looking at him, to which he replied that he had already noticed it, which meant that it planned to attack him first. Almost immediately, the monster launched its attack, but our protagonists managed to dodge it. Right after, Jude called Cordelia, and she said, while tearing 2 scrolls, that she was already aware of the fact that wolf-type monsters were idiots who could only attack in a straight line. Right after, she used the scrolls to cast a double bind, while telling the wolf that he would enjoy the taste of 2 restraints. Moreover, she also cast grease to make things even more difficult for the boss, who ended up falling to the ground. The Fury Wolf's quick movements were the biggest thing they had to be cautious of while they fought it, but it also had a weakness. It was extremely easy to predict its attack patterns. So, if they were just able to restrain its legs, it should be simple to kill, but even if she used that item, because of the difference in levels, the time that the Fury Wolf was bound was too short. Furthermore, it would become more disadvantageous for them the longer they dragged the battle out. So she called Outboxer 009, since she knew that he needed to finish his preparation work quickly. Shortly after, he declared, with a confident expression while arranging various scrolls, that from that point onward, he would begin his preparations. Almost immediately, he attacked the wolf with a lightning spell, which confused Cordelia since he was attacking the monster after telling her to focus on dodging. However, she suddenly realized something, and at the same time, the chains that were binding the wolf broke. Right after, Jude warned Cordelia, since the wolf was heading her way. Luckily, she managed to dodge the attack. Moreover, she also managed to notice there was something strange happening, although she couldn't figure out what it was. She was sure that Jude was attacking the wolf continuously, so she didn't understand why it looked like it hadn't taken even a single bit of damage. Furthermore, she had been getting a feeling for a while that something didn't quite match up. Right after, Jude told Cordelia that it was still lacking, which confused her. However, he didn't waste time explaining and directly told her to use some water attribute magic. Immediately thereafter, Cordelia cast Water Pole, and almost at the same time, Jude cast another lightning spell. He then noticed that, as expected, the combination of the two worked better, so they just had to do it a little more from that moment onward. Meanwhile, Cordelia wondered if that feeling was related to the fact that she had gotten irritated by watching him get all excited by himself. However, as Jude kept using lightning spells against the wolf, she thought that it was not just that. She tried hard to find out why she was feeling weirdly anxious, but unfortunately, she couldn't focus because of some song that kept repeating in her head. In fact, for a while before, she felt like she could hear a certain song playing in her ears. So she began to wonder if her strange feeling was related to that song and why it seemed to be related to the word thunder. At that moment, she began to recall the conversation she had had with Jude before entering the boss's room, and finally, all the pieces fell into place. The whole time, they had been hitting the lightning attribute Fury Wolf with lightning. After all, no matter how many times they hit a lightning attribute monster with a lightning attribute spell, the only thing it did was become fuel to charge its strength. As if to prove her right, the wolf began to power up, and while Cordelia was stunned seeing the monster getting stronger, Jude was elated, saying that the boss had properly awakened. After hearing that, she got really mad and began to curse and yell at him. After all, she finally realized that the thing he had to prepare was strengthening the boss. Right after, he defended himself by saying that it couldn't be helped because defeating an awakened Fury Wolf was the required hidden condition to obtain the B-rank skill book. However, that didn't appease her because she was angry at him for not telling her that information ahead of time. Still, he only laughed and said that doing that wouldn't have been fun, which shocked her because she hadn't expected him to be so brutally honest. Right after, he gave her more magic circles while telling her that they should quickly take care of the boss and get their B-rank skill book. Almost immediately, she grabbed the scrolls and began to tear them to attack the boss with fire spells while looking at Jude with an "I will kill you" expression so intense that he finally gave in and told her that he would tell her next time. Sadly, that was not enough for her, and he told her that since they were in a bit of a pickle at that moment, he would let her finish cursing him out later. Almost immediately, the boss launched toward them. Fury wolves and other wolf race monsters had a common trait: powerful leg strength and a linear attack pattern that used that to charge like a bullet. But because the attack trajectory was so simple, as long as you got the timing right, you could dodge it. So, regardless of levels, as long as you had good controls, that monster was a pushover. Unfortunately, game and reality were two different things. The wolf attacked, and Cordelia and Jude managed to dodge it, but the monster then changed directions by using one of the pillars as a launch pad and charged directly toward her. After dodging the follow-up attack, she thought that the boss's combat pattern should have changed because it had ranked up, and immediately blamed Outboxer 009 for making things harder for them. She then thought that the wolf was going to make a follow-up attack by switching directions of its charge, and wondered which way it was going to jump the following time. Still, she believed that she might be able to follow its attack with her eyes. However, the problem was that there was no guarantee that she would be able to dodge it again. At that moment, Jude felt sick and fell to the ground while dropping the scrolls in his hands. The wolf quickly took notice of the opening and launched its attack toward him. Nevertheless, he changed directions various times, thanks to the pillars, to deceive Cordelia. She couldn't believe how something like that had happened at that precise moment. Still, she managed to react and threw various magic missiles toward the monster. Sadly, the wolf easily nullified her magic, which shocked the young lady. Time passed, and the boss was about to hit the defenseless Jude, while Cordelia kept racking her brain trying to figure out what to do. She even began to recall all the moments she had spent with Jude since her arrival in that world, and concluded that she couldn't stop the boss because it was just too fast. Suddenly, something completely unexpected happened. When the wolf was about to land a devastating blow, it started rolling on the ground like a hurt puppy, apparently unable to withstand a strong stimulus. That left Cordelia totally flabbergasted, but she then noticed a disgusting smell. At that moment, Jude began to laugh while taking out a smelly pouch. He then said that since the Fury Wolf should have even greater abilities than that after awakening, there was no way it should be able to withstand the smell from the pouch, which was a special scent bomb created by fusing various items. In the end, no matter how much experience you got from goblins, you couldn't level up enough to a point where you could defeat a Fury Wolf through traditional means. So, he had prepared something to neutralize the Fury Wolf, with a means that was only possible because it was not a game but reality. Still, he didn't miss the chance to tease Cordelia and lectured her about the fact that trump cards should always be pulled out at the last second, which hit the mark because he began to get angry again. Nevertheless, he was not immune to the smell, and at that moment, he couldn't take it anymore and began to puke, which inadvertently calmed her down since he truly looked very pathetic at that point. She even thought that both he and the wolf looked very lame. Jude then managed to compose a little and said that a solution simply had to work, which was in line with his result-oriented, no-life gamer personality. Still, he was really on his limit, and added that despite making the bomb himself, it stank way too much. As for Cordelia, while looking at Jude in that sorry state, she began to blush while realizing something. Being able to think outside the box and pull out solutions like that was what was needed to be the server rank 1, a person she had never managed to beat. After all, she was also a result-oriented, no-life gamer. Right after, Jude reminded her that they still had to kill the boss, and she quickly agreed. Right after, she prepared to deal the finishing blow while mocking the poor creature. Okay, calling the wolf a poor creature might be too much, but the way Jude beat the boss was unfair, no matter how much he tries to sugarcoat it. Almost immediately, Cordelia created a hole and threw the wolf inside, and Jude didn't miss the chance to make another Pokemon joke at the expense of her, which obviously annoyed the young lady, who told him that he was not funny at all. Right after, they killed the wolf and began to walk away. At that moment, Cordelia remembered that they were in a simulated dungeon, which meant that she had worried about him for no reason. After all, even if he had died there, he would have just been kicked out of the dungeon. While she was feeling like a total fool, Jude noticed that they were leveling up, which meant that they had managed to kill the boss with no problem. Right after, the system informed that they had obtained the title Who Slew a Fury Wolf before level 10. I wonder, who did the last hit? At that moment, Jude recalled that, in the game, other than experience, they also gave titles like that. The system then informed them that all their stats were permanently increased by 1. Cordelia asked Jude if he had heard the sound of the notification, and he confirmed it, although he told her that he didn't know if you could call that a sound. After all, it was more like something ringing in his head. She then began to brag about her achievements since the system had given her a title, and Jude thought that he was glad that she looked happy. He then guessed that the whole title thing should make her forget about the fact that he had awakened the Fury Wolf without telling her. That was wrong, and he should know it. He then told her that they should go get their reward, and she smiled at him before casting grease to make him fall. Right after, her aura turned evil, and she made him promise that he would always give her a heads up before he awakened a boss. As for him, at that moment, he understood. She was not just going to let it slide. In fact, she kept insulting him for scaring her like that, and he apologized to her while thinking that he couldn't tell her that, during the fight, he had purposely fallen to attract the boss's attention because it looked like it was targeting her. Instead, he reminded her that they had gotten the promised rewards. Right after, both of them got their skill books, and an elated Cordelia said that opening up the items was her favorite part. In her opinion, it was exciting thinking about what you would get. It was then that she recalled that he had told her that he already knew what his skill book was, and he confirmed it by saying that it was a step technique called 36 Worldly Steps. After hearing the name, Cordelia said that it sounded similar to the 12 faith steps he frequently used in the game. He then told her that martial arts names were like that, while thinking that the 12 faith steps was an upgraded version of the 36 worldly steps. He also admitted that she was very sharp, especially since that was a piece of hidden information that you needed to know to obtain the skill. 36 worldly steps was a B rank technique, and its next stage was the A rank, 24 Gale steps, and after that, it was the S rank, 12 faith steps. Furthermore, if you evolved it one step further, it was the ultimate and ethereal step technique called 9 celestial steps. 9 celestial steps was said to let you hide even from the heavens in just 9 steps. It was something he hadn't been able to obtain, even when he was Outboxer 009. At that moment, Cordelia decided that it was time to open her skill book and wondered out loud if she could get a skill book that even Outboxer 009 might not know about. Once the excited Cordelia opened it, she realized that it was a skill called Fire Missile, a fire attribute magic missile. Immediately thereafter, she said that he liked it, and Jude told her that he was glad for her. He then said that since they had gotten their rewards, all that was left was for them to return, but Cordelia interrupted him by saying that they should take a break. She also added that she believed that the Necklace of the Sun should be doing its job. After all, he would have fainted from exhaustion just a few days before. After hearing that, Jude immediately replied that she was right, before adding that it was an item he had gotten thanks to a special someone. Interestingly, Cordelia didn't overreact after hearing his sweet talk, and instead said that not only was his 9-blocked yin pathways disease slowly being cured, but they were both above level 10 at that moment. Jude confirmed that too, and she told him that, since that was the case, they should move on to the next stage. By the next stage, she meant the Invasion of the Demon Hand event. Both of them said the name of the event at the same time, and they immediately praised each other for being so knowledgeable. Characters in Legend of Heroes 2 each have their own main scenario. That was the case for Gale, Lucas Racevelger, Cordelia Chase, Jude Bayer, and Maximilian. Of course, no matter who you played as, every ending was the end of the world. Setting that aside, the scenario that people had said showed how rotten the morality of the devs was beyond any doubt was Cordelia Chase's main scenario. Cordelia's story started from her leaving on a journey to attend a friendly social gathering amidst the 12 children of the northern clans. As a reference, Jude's starting point in the main story was half a year after Cordelia's. After a peaceful tutorial at Earl Chase's palace-like mansion, the sub-events that constantly happened after leaving the mansion, and enjoying the hidden events discovered by users on the day of the massive event that was the social gathering at the hands of demon worshippers called Demon Hand, the peaceful social gathering descended into chaos. Due to that, most of the children of the 12 clans that participated in the party were either killed or kidnapped and brainwashed. From the mess, Cordelia managed to escape by the skin of her teeth, having lost her guards, who were like family to her. as well as friends whom she reunited with after so long. It was a hellish scenario where you started alone in a remote forest after a long escape. Moreover, because it was a forced event, there was nothing you could do other than skip it. Because of that, the players on the forum criticized and even insulted the devs a lot, since they all thought that Cordelia's main scenario was just too cruel. Jude then thought that there was only half a month left until Demon Hand attacked the social gathering, and according to the game, Cordelia was the only one to survive that attack. He then told her that there was no need to follow a doomed scenario, to which Cordelia immediately and vehemently agreed. Right after, she said that going along with the game was going to bring nothing but the Armageddon ending, so they needed to make a new happy ending, and the way to start that was to first stop the Demon Hand. Jude agreed with her idea and added that they couldn't lose a powerful ally like the 12 northern clans for nothing. Almost immediately, Cordelia, while biting her thumb, said that she was going to protect Dahlia. She even added that she was not going to let her die like a sacrificial NPC while protecting the young lady, and those words made Jude get serious. He knew that just because Cordelia had gained memories of her time on Earth, it didn't mean that her memories of living in Pleiades had disappeared. So she had both her memories of enjoying Legend of Heroes 2 and her memories of living and growing up in Pleiades. To Cordelia, whose night escort she treated like her own sister, regaining her memories of the video game had been fundamentally the same as seeing a vision of the future where she would lose her family. Jude also guessed that the violence in Cordelia's story probably hit harder for her than anyone else out there. So even if he still saw her very strongly as Yellowstorm, at the end of the day, she was the one and only Cordelia. At that moment, she pulled him out of his reverie by telling him that, in the game, Jude Bayer couldn't attend the social gathering due to his 9-blocked yin pathways disease. However, she assumed that it would not be the case at that moment. After hearing that, he confirmed it by saying that his condition had gotten a lot better in those days, which had been possible thanks to his dear Cordelia, who had helped him obtain the Necklace of the Sun. Of course, he told her that to tease her, and she easily fell into the trap and got annoyed by his silver tongue. However, she quickly brushed that aside and asked him, while looking very bashful, if he was going to go with her to the social gathering since he had gotten a bit better. That truly surprised him, since there was never an attend the social gathering scenario for Jude in the game. However, the reason he had rushed the treatment for his condition was to make that change for his story in the first place, so there was no need for her to worry so much about it. Still, he didn't miss the chance to tease her again and replied that if his dear Cordelia wished it to be so, he would do it. And again, she took the bait and got even angrier. In fact, she demanded that he stop doing that because she was getting goosebumps. Sometime later, Jude was training by running around in the training grounds, and shortly after she finished the 10 laps he had planned to do that morning. At that moment, a middle-aged man approached him while praising him since his record had improved, and his stamina was increasing day by day. That middle-aged man was Victor Cromwell, a retired knight who had served the Bayer estate for many years, and he was very impressed with Jude's attitude. After all, he was showing a dazzling expression, even when he was covered in sweat, which the middle-aged man misunderstood as if Jude had forgotten the pain he was in because of his eagerness to learn the art. What Victor didn't know was that Jude was showing that expression because the towel he was currently using to dry the sweat was made of the exact same material as the sports towels back on Earth. The retired knight then told Jude that there was no need to be frustrated or disappointed in himself because he was starting later than most others. Victor then added that with the young master's talent, he would be able to make up for his slow start in no time, before asking him if he understood that. Of course, Jude immediately replied that he did, and that he would keep the man's words in mind. After hearing that, Victor thought, with teary eyes, that it was amazing that the young master, who had been suffering and frustrated due to his 9-blocked yin pathways disease, would progress to the point where he was growing every day. To the retired knight, that was the blessing of the Bayer household, and he wished for the Count to return home so that he might see the valiant visage of his son as soon as he was able. Obviously, Jude guessed what the other was thinking and thought that Jude was a genius in martial arts, so the fact that he was starting later than the others didn't even count as a penalty. However, before they could say anything else, an exhausted Maja interrupted them. The maid was very tired because she had run to get there. Jude noticed it and asked her what was happening and why she was in that state. Maja then took a breath of air to collect herself and replied that correspondence from the Chase country had arrived. After hearing that, Victor blushed and asked if Cordelia had sent a letter to their young master. On the other hand, Jude wondered if something had happened to Yellowstorm. However, Maja explained that the correspondence was not from Miss Cordelia, but from her father, Count Arthur Chase, which shocked our protagonist. A while later, he was standing in front of the Chase County, wondering how he had gotten there. He remembered the letter saying that he should visit the county so that he could discuss the recent actions he had taken with Cordelia. Still, he was so nervous at that moment that he couldn't even remember how he had gotten there. Nevertheless, he felt like he was losing it, since that was so out of left field. Still, he tried to compose himself and tried to recall what sort of person Count Chase was. He seemed like a kind of dimwit from Cordelia's story, and Jude believed that it was precisely because of it that he had called him. So Jude guessed that Count Chase perhaps wanted him to explain just why he had taken Cordelia and run in the flower fields. Or perhaps they had been caught having their secret meeting at the temple as soon as their house arrest was lifted. While he was engrossed in considering all the possibilities, he was interrupted by Maja, who told him that there was no need to be so nervous. After all, he and Cordelia were in an engagement officially sanctioned by both households, so a bit of deviation from the norm should not be a problem. However, the way Maja behaved while saying that was anything but reassuring, especially because her voice was shaking. She then told Jude that Miss Cordelia's father would be his father-in-law in the future, so she was sure that the Count would understand. Still, reminding him that the Count would be his father-in-law was not that reassuring either. However, he then thought that Maja was right, and he tried to calm down, thinking that the Count just wanted to meet the person who would be his son-in-law, face to face. Sadly, that made him realize that the place where he was would be his in-law's house, which made him feel terrified because that was an even worse train of thought to go into. At that moment, he felt like he was going nuts and began to wonder what he should say, even considering whether he should request Cordelia's hand. It was then that Dahlia pulled him out of his reverie by calling his name, before telling him that she would escort him to the drawing room. Jude began to follow the guard and asked her if Cordelia knew about his visit, to which Dahlia replied that she didn't yet know that the Count had called young Master Jude to be there. After hearing that, Jude felt even worse, since there was no time for them to figure out a plan before he entered the boss room. Shortly after, they arrived at a room, and Dahlia knocked on the door while saying that she had taken young Master Jude with her. The guard then opened the door and asked a very nervous Jude to enter, before adding that the Count was waiting for him. Somewhere else in the middle of a forest, there were a lot of soldiers camping, and one of those young warriors wondered out loud if it was because the days were getting colder, but monsters were definitely appearing more often. The blue-haired young man then said that he hoped there was no damage to the city. After hearing that, another warrior, who looked older and who had a scar on his face, replied that they were there precisely due to that, which was why they needed to cull as many monsters as they could before they returned. The man with the scar was Alex Bayer, one of the 10 great swordmasters of the Salin Kingdom, and Jude's father. Right after, the blue-haired young man quickly agreed before asking the other, who was his father, what it was that he was looking at, to which Alex replied that the intel Victor had sent had just arrived, and he was reading through it. The young man then asked if something had happened, and Alex replied that it was about Jude. Not only was he noticeably healthier, but it seemed like he could jump into martial arts at any time. That surprised the blue-haired young man, who asked if the 9-block yin pathways had healed. His father then said that it hadn't healed completely yet, but because of the necklace of the sun that he and Miss Cordelia had found, he was slowly getting better. That surprised the blue-haired young man, and he said that Miss Cordelia was the luckiest thing to ever happen to Jude. Alex then laughed and said that if Arthur heard that, he would be happy, to which the young man replied that if it was Count Chase, he believed that he would be happy indeed. Afterward, the young man asked his father if that would be enough of a break, to which the other replied by advising his son not to push his subordinates past their limit, just because he was in a hurry. Still, the young man said that he wanted to be even just 1 second faster so that he could see a healthy Jude. That young man was none other than Gale Bayer, heir to Count Bayer and Jude's older brother, and at that moment, he was wondering if his younger brother was doing well. Meanwhile, the young boy in question was sitting beside Count Chase, looking very nervous, and thinking that it felt as if all the recovery he had made due to the necklace of the sun had disappeared in an instant. The feeling of his insides hardening and his hands and feet getting cold, that anxiety, it was similar to when he was face-to-face with Lysagang. Arthur Chase, together with his longtime friend Count Bayer, was part of the so-named 4 great northern powers. Called the Crimson Storm, he was one of Salin Kingdom's top battle mages, and his child was Yellowstorm. In the original Jude's main scenario, Cordelia's father, Count Chase, would have no reason to meet Jude. Because Jude was growing weaker with the 9-blocked yin pathways, the two would slowly grow apart. Moreover, due to Cordelia going missing during the social gathering, the engagement would be broken off. So, the meeting between him and Arthur was another change from the original scenario. At that moment, Jude noticed that the tea was too sweet, and he wondered if the maid had made a mistake. After all, he didn't believe that the Count would do that on purpose. Right after, Jude's thoughts were interrupted by Arthur, who finally broke the silence by saying that there were a few stories that he had heard. Afterward, the Count went silent again, and Jude thought that the silence was too heavy and wondered what he should do and what words he should say. The Count then broke the silence again by saying that, during a crisis, he had received the opportunity of a lifetime. As for Jude, he felt so suffocated by the pressure that he was considering the idea of kneeling in front of the man. Still, he managed to listen to the Count's words, and after being shocked for a little while, he replied that he had been lucky to have obtained the necklace of the sun. Our protagonist then gave the item to Arthur, who quickly took it. The Count then said that it was the religious order's greatest treasure, a relic, before adding that it was quite the opportunity of a lifetime. After all, just by holding it like that, he could feel the extreme yang energy continuously radiating out. At that point, Jude noticed that Arthur was not saying much about the crisis, and wondered if the Count, being a magician, was that interested in the necklace of the sun. The Count then said that it was amazing that the item would radiate that much yang energy, before adding that everything else would be useless from that moment onward. Those words surprised and confused Jude, but the Count ignored the other's reaction and added that since he had already taken it, he might as well give it to Jude anyway. The man then placed a small box on the table and told Jude that it was not much. Jude then took the box while thanking Arthur and wondering if the Count had truly given him that. He then told himself that since it had been the case, he was allowed to open it. Once he did it, he realized that inside was an extreme yang pill, a pill that radiated extreme yang energy, which was one of the ingredients for curing the 9-block yin pathways. At that moment, Jude was totally shocked because the item in front of him was something very valuable. Right after, he thanked the Count again. It was then that Arthur decided to take the game to the next level and said that he had also heard that when he and Cordelia fell off the cliff, his daughter had Princess carried him and jumped off. The Count wanted to know if that was true, and an embarrassed Jude quickly confirmed it, while thinking that he couldn't tell the man that he had also gotten a piggyback ride. Still, the Count called Jude a weak bastard and gave him another box that had some berries inside. Berries that would help increase the young boy's strength. Arthur then added that since there were only weakling magicians who could barely hold their staves around there, Jude should eat them instead. Jude stuttered again while thanking the Count, since he couldn't believe he had received berries that could increase his strength. He then opened the box and confirmed that they were strength berries and that they helped increase someone's muscular strength. That discovery shocked the heck out of him, since those were items that you couldn't even see in the early parts of the game. Not only that, but the Count had just given them to him. At that moment, Arthur pulled Jude out of his reverie by telling him that since both the extreme yang pill and the strength berries had a bitter taste, Jude should eat them together with the tea, which explained why the young boy had been served such sweet tea. At that moment, our protagonist finally connected the dots and concluded that the Count was polite to the point of stubbornness. In the meantime, Cordelia was lying on her bed while saying that he had slept well and had just woken up. Still, she wondered why she felt so stuffy. Jude then wondered if the Count was really a good person. After all, he had given him an extreme yang pill and some strength berries, not to mention how considerate he was being. Of course, there was also another explanation. It could be that Arthur liked our protagonist a lot. At that moment, Cordelia's father noticed Jude's ring, and the young boy said that it was a gift Arthur had sent him before. He then added that he was always wearing it. The reason Jude and Cordelia were engaged was that Earl Bayer and Earl Chase were longtime friends, so they promised a prenatal engagement. But, because it was an engagement that had been set up without consent from the actual duo involved, the two had an awkward relationship. However, since they were nobles, they had to look like they were on good terms in the eyes of others, which was why the Count had sent Jude that couple's equipment to wear. It was a couple's ring, but Jude was too embarrassed to say the actual name. At that moment, Arthur said something that left Jude completely flabbergasted. Out of nowhere, and after showing great hospitality and goodwill, the Count told Jude to throw the ring away. Nevertheless, Jude quickly recovered and politely asked why the other was asking him to do it, to which Arthur replied that he was the only one wearing it at that moment. After hearing that, Jude realized that he had never seen Cordelia wearing it, so he had to tell the Count that he was indeed right. Arthur then revealed that Cordelia had said that she had accidentally lost it, before asking Jude not to make a fuss and just let it slide since the Count was about to get new ones for them. Of course, Jude believed that Cordelia had probably thrown it away rather than lost it, since she didn't have the intention to marry Outboxer 009. Still, he decided to play along and told the Count that he would follow his instructions. Jude then thought that he was nervous, thinking that the Count would nullify their engagement out of jealousy or pure rage. However, at that moment, the young boy was certain that Arthur was just someone who had a hard time showing his feelings honestly. In other words, the man is a pure tsundere. In fact, at that moment, Jude also realized something very obvious. Cordelia really was Earl Chase's daughter, considering that their personalities were definitely genetic. Right after, Arthur told him that he had heard that Jude was going to join Cordelia at the social gathering, which our protagonist quickly confirmed. However, the young boy called Arthur father-in-law, which caught the man by surprise. The Count then told Jude, while blushing, that he didn't know if the young boy would be able to handle the long journey with his frail body, so he would need quite a bit of stamina to travel far away. At that moment, Jude immediately assumed that the man was going to give him the stamina berry, which was quickly confirmed by the Count. Shortly after, Arthur said that they were done and told Jude that he might leave. Jude then replied that he would take his leave and didn't forget to call the Count father-in-law. Moreover, despite feeling full, our protagonist had to admit that he felt invigorated. In fact, it felt nice even with how full his tummy was. However, once he left the Count's office, she met with a stunned Cordelia, an embarrassed Dahlia, and a calm Maja. Still, Jude didn't lose his composure and told her that she was finally there, which shocked her even more because she couldn't understand how he could be so nonchalant. She then asked him when he had arrived and why he hadn't told her that he was going there. Right after, Jude tried to calm her down by telling her that it had been a sudden summon, which was why he didn't have time to reach out to her. He also added that nothing big had happened. Nevertheless, she didn't buy his explanation and said that her father wouldn't summon him unless it was a big deal. Then she asked him if her father had scolded him and if the Count had said that the engagement was off. However, Jude ignored those questions and tried to change the subject in a lame and obvious way by saying that the garden was really beautiful, before adding that he had seen it when he was looking around the mansion on his way there. That pissed Cordelia even more, and she quickly asked him what the heck he was suddenly on about. Still, Jude kept calm and asked her to give him the honor of taking her out on a walk, while thinking that she was very vulgar. Sometime later, when they were alone in the garden, he finally explained to her what had happened during his conversation with her father. He even told her that her father had told him to get stronger so he could carry her around, which the man didn't explicitly say, although it was very much implied, if you ask me. That gave her the shivers, and she immediately said that it was gross, before adding that she could walk with her own 2 legs. Jude then explains that her father had told him that because he knew about them running away at the flower field, which calmed her down since she finally understood why they were talking about that in the first place. Right after, Jude let her know that the problem didn't seem to be the fact that they had run, but that she was the one to carry him. At that moment, Cordelia finally felt better and said that he had worried about nothing, which he confirmed while thinking that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. After all, even the way she harumphed was just like Earl Chase. However, he also had realized that her looks seemed to be mostly from her mother. While they kept walking, Jude also said that her father had made him eat so much because of that issue that he felt like his stomach was going to burst, which made Cordelia tease him since he was complaining about being full. Although, she didn't miss the chance to tell him that he should finally be able to understand her pain from being full of mana potions back at the dungeon. It was then that Cordelia noticed something else, which made Jude feel nervous. She then told him that the dark circles under his eyes were gone, which meant that his 9-blocked yin pathways condition should be getting better. Right after, she began to make fun of him since he looked very gloomy before. Nevertheless, Jude was focused on other things. He had realized that she was able to notice stuff like that, which meant that she was surprisingly observant. Moreover, he began to feel uncomfortable because she had gotten really close. Still, he tried to look calm and told her that next up was Earl Bayer, who was set to return in 10 days at the latest. That made her feel excited because if he was bringing up his dad, that meant that he was currently in a good enough condition to start learning martial arts, which in turn meant that he was preparing for the father's test quest. Jude then quickly confirmed it by saying that he didn't have a choice since he couldn't leave the city without doing that. After hearing that, Cordelia admitted that he had a point, since it was a must to start Jude Bayer's main scenario. From the release of Legend of Heroes 2, a character had been long neglected by players since he had an extremely slow start with a rough physical penalty. That character was Jude Bayer. Just like other online games, in Legends of Heroes 2, there were both noble characters that were popular with users and unpopular characters that were neglected. There was Maximilian, who was considered a tier 0. Then there were well-balanced characters with lots of guides, such as Lucas, and there were also characters that were considered trash. Luckily, Cordelia and Jude were not part of that last category, but they were very close to it since they were very unpopular characters played by a few people. Furthermore, even in that tier list, Jude was a character that very few people played. While Cordelia was an unpopular character due to having a doom and gloom scenario and high play difficulty, the biggest reason people avoided playing Jude was that the character's setting was super frustrating. One of Jude's biggest downsides was the 9-blocked yin pathways condition, which was naturally cured by progressing the story and obtaining the Sunfire Carp, an item that was gifted by Earl Chase. The time when you were cured was over half a year after the starting point in the game. And if you were to ask what someone could do while playing Jude for that half year, it was either watch the final leaf out of the window while sitting in bed all day, faint while struggling to control the body that ran out of stamina if you walked for more than 10 minutes, or you could create your own content by discovering creative ways to faint. At the start, Jude was basically a minor, pretty boy, sick side character. So, since you needed to experience that pain to play, almost no one wanted to play such a frustrating character since it was a video game. Sure, he did awaken talents worthy of a protagonist later, but Jude got why no one wanted to play with such a lame start. Also, treating the 9-blocked yin pathways was just the start. You couldn't leave the territory unless you cleared the father's test quest. In fact, at that moment, Jude began to wonder why he had played as that annoying character when he was Outboxer 09, before telling himself that perhaps he should have played a different character instead. The second reason that made Jude an unpopular character was the quest that progressed to prove to Earl Bayer that his illness had been cured. Moreover, it was a mandatory first quest to make it to the main scenario. To complete the quest, known as Father's Test, you needed to train Jude according to Earl Bayer's standards, and because that standard was far above average, you needed to stay tied up in the mansion even a month or two after recovery, and that quest had been revealed to have no roundabout shortcuts. Not to mention that you couldn't even skip or auto it. As a matter of fact, Jude was thinking that he would become bald if he kept training like that. Well, dearie, if you want superpowers, you have to be willing to pay the price. Having Saitama's power is only possible for bald guys. That's a scientific fact, according to the University of Kobe. Because I say so. Nevertheless, the fact that the quest had no shortcuts was something that applied only in the game. At that moment, Cordelia pulled Jude out of his reverie by saying that his quest took a really long time before asking him if he would be able to make it to the social gathering. The young boy then took out the necklace of the sun and replied that he shouldn't have any problems thanks to it. However, the young miss didn't get how the item was related to completing the quest, so he explained to her that the necklace was an item that only had a 3% drop rate in the game since it was a super high-tier item. That meant that they had already made it big by obtaining such a precious item. After all, even Earl Chase called it an opportunity of a lifetime when he saw it. Furthermore, he had also gotten an unexpected gift by going to her house, not to mention that she had told him that he looked pretty healthy. At that moment, Cordelia joined the dots and said that Jude had already met his father's standards, which he confirmed, before adding, with a very suspicious smile, that he also had her. That smile gave her the shivers, and she immediately asked him what he was talking about and why he was smiling like that, but he refused to answer. Meanwhile, Dahlia and Maja were commenting on how well the couple was getting along. One morning, 1 week later, a maid informed Cordelia that Jude had sent her a letter, which surprised her. She then took it and began to open the envelope while thinking that she believed that she wouldn't have to see him until the day before they headed to the social gathering. So, she wondered what had happened. Shortly after, she felt like insulting him for being cheesy while writing the first sentence. So she decided to skip all that and focus on the important part. Apparently, since Count Bayer would return from his expedition soon, Jude needed Cordelia to do something for him. However, she didn't like the request at all because there was no way she could say something that embarrassing to him. Moreover, there was no date for when they should meet written there or anything, so she didn't know what to do. At that moment, Dahlia arrived and told the young lady that she had a message from her father. The Count's friend and Jude's father, Alex Bayer, would be returning that day from his expedition. So, Count Chase had asked Dahlia to tell Cordelia to prepare herself for a trip to the Bayer estate to participate in the social, which shocked the young lady. 2 days later, in the dining room of the Bayer estate, Cordelia was wondering how she had gotten there. She remembered riding the carriage with her father, but she didn't recall anything else. In fact, she didn't know why she had gone there in the first place. In fact, she looked the same way as Jude when he went to meet her father, and the young boy quickly noticed it. On the other hand, Cordelia was very upset because, in her opinion, it shouldn't be allowed for an event to appear suddenly like that, especially if that event was not in the game. Well, if she truly wants to get her happy ending, that is precisely what she needs to happen. So, in the meantime, both Counts and Gale were commenting on the events of the flower fields and agreed that Jude and Cordelia had been very lucky to find the necklace of the sun while frolicking through that place. Gale even thanked Cordelia and went as far as to say that she was a goddess of fortune to the Bayer estate, which made Arthur feel elated and Cordelia feel flabbergasted. In fact, she quickly replied that Gale was giving her too much credit. However, he interrupted her by saying that she should call him brother-in-law, which made her feel sick. However, Gale misunderstood her reaction as her being embarrassed and told Jude that he was really fortunate. Shortly after, the meal came to an end, and Alex told Cordelia that he had heard from Jude that she wished to request something from him before asking her what it was. After hearing that, Cordelia felt extremely nervous, to Jude's amusement. Still, he decided to go easy on her and quickly took command of the conversation by telling his father that he would tell him in her place, to which Alex agreed. The young boy then said that he wished to participate in the social gathering that would take place in the near future with Lady Cordelia. Alex then raised his glass of wine and said that, according to what he knew, the social gathering was being held in the city of commerce, Langasthai. Right after, Gale confirmed it and added that Jude had the right to attend since it was being held for those from the 12 northern clans who were not of age. In fact, it should be customary for Jude to attend. Nevertheless, Alex said that he found it hard to believe that someone like Jude, who had never held a blade properly in his hands before, could set foot outside the land he was born in. While his father was talking, Jude looked at Cordelia with a confident smile, since he had already gotten them 1 foot into the gate. In fact, he expected her to be ready to do what she needed to do. As for Cordelia, she was really tense and didn't want to do it. Not to mention that she was not sure if that plot was going to work. Back with Alex, he said that the Bayer household prided itself on fighting prowess, before adding that he could only grant Jude permission to leave the house if he was strong enough to protect himself. At that moment, Cordelia interrupted Count Bayer and yelled at him that she really wanted to go with Jude, while screaming inside that she really didn't want to do that. However, that indeed moved Alex, who immediately changed his mood from being serious to being paternal and explained to her that Jude was bedridden until just recently. However, Arthur then decided to step in and criticize Alex for his old-fashioned temperament. Count Chase then began to explain how valuable the Necklace of the Sun was, before asking Alex if he believed that Jude had obtained it out of sheer coincidence or luck. Of course, Arthur believed that Jude still had room to improve, but he believed that Alex's son had already proved himself and his abilities plenty. That statement caught Count Bayer by surprise, and he didn't even know what to say, especially when Cordelia dealt the finishing blow by begging him while showing her puppy eyes. Of course, she was puking inside, but Alex didn't know that. And to make things even harder for Alex, Arthur politely reminded him that he shouldn't go against her daughter after she had gone that far. In the end, Count Bayer was completely overwhelmed, but he still managed to find a way to save face. He then told Jude that he had heard from Victor that the young boy was in fit enough condition to learn their martial arts, which Jude quickly confirmed. Alex then offered him to start his lessons that afternoon, which shocked both Jude and Cordelia, especially when the Count said that he was a strict teacher and that Jude should better keep up. The lovebirds couldn't believe that Count Bayer was going to teach Jude himself, since it had never happened before in the game. In fact, Jude began to believe that perhaps they might have unlocked a bonus reward. Sometime later, Jude and Cordelia were walking outside while discussing how amazing it all had been. In fact, Jude was grateful that he had made a good impression on her father because his help had been crucial. Afterward, very happy, Jude said that he had thought of all of that as something bothersome, but he had to admit that it was great that his father would be the one teaching him. On the other hand, Cordelia was also very excited and thought that Jude was not only happy that his father was personally training him, but he was also excited to experience an event that didn't happen in the game. At that moment, she began to tease him since he kept complaining about his condition, and asked him what he would do if he failed to complete the quest, to which he replied that he had never complained that much. Furthermore, his condition had gotten better, and he had also learned the 36 worldly steps, so there was no way he would disappoint his father when it came to the real thing. Right after, he began to tease her again, and she took the bait for the umpteenth time. Cordelia then wished him luck in her own way, which touched him to the point that he told her that she was truly like her father, which confused her since he omitted the part that he thought that both of them were tsundere. Right after, she told Jude that his father was a very nice person and that she was glad for that. But before he could reply, Cordelia noticed that Dahlia was calling them, which meant that it was time to head back. Cordelia then said goodbye to him, while reassuring him by saying that she would take all the items he had told her to prepare for the event. Then, while he saw her walking away, the young boy recalled something. As far as he knew, Jude was programmed to look like his father, but that was not the case anymore. However, since thinking about that was giving him a headache, he decided to just ignore it.